Deliveries go through the service entrance. This lobby isn't for that.
I'm not making a delivery.
Then you're in the wrong building.
The man Graham Holt dismissed in 11 words had arrived at that building the same way he arrived at all 9 of his properties, without announcement, without a car service, and without the visible markers that caused people like Holt to recalibrate their assumptions before they opened their mouths. What Holt had seen was a paper bag and a jacket that had not been purchased with an audience in mind. What he had not seen was the access card in that jacket pocket. Not a visitor pass, not a tenant badge, but a MasterCard, the kind that did not exist in quantity in a building like this one, and was not given to people who were in the wrong building. He had also not seen the folder sitting on a desk across the city, where a contract renewal was waiting for a signature that had not yet been given, and where the person who needed to give that signature had spent the morning walking every floor of the building before a decision was made. Graham Holt walked away from that lobby, certain he had handled a minor inconvenience. He had no way of knowing that the minor inconvenience owned the floor he was standing on, and that the folder was still waiting. If you've ever watched someone mistake a paper bag for a verdict, stay with me and subscribe, because what came next arrived in a white envelope without explanation and said everything that needed to be said. 15 years before that lobby, Daniel Reeves had walked into a bank on the corner of Morrison and 5th, with a folder of financial projections and a request for a loan that the senior lending officer described with the particular courtesy of someone declining something they found mildly unreasonable as ambitious, given the current market conditions. Daniel thanked him, took the folder back, and spent the following 3 weeks finding a smaller regional lender whose loan committee was willing to look at the numbers rather than the neighborhood. The building he bought with that loan was 7 stories half vacant and located in a section of the East Corridor that most commercial analysts were still describing as transitional. He had believed for 2 years that the description would change. He had been right, and being right had not substantially changed the way he operated, which was to look at what was actually there, rather than at what the surrounding conversation said was there. Reeves Capital Properties now owned 9 commercial properties in the city, with total leasable area exceeding 800,000 square feet, and an occupancy rate that had held above 92% for 3 consecutive years. The company's name appeared on lease agreements, maintenance contracts, and the occasional filing with the city's commercial property registry. Daniel Reeves's name appeared in those filings as the registered owner, and nowhere else in any public-facing material. There were no photographs, no interviews, no appearances at industry conferences. Carol Briggs managed the day-to-day operation of every property through a team of 8 people, and she was the face of every tenant relationship in the portfolio. Daniel had built the company to function this way from the beginning. Not out of a desire for secrecy, but out of a preference for efficiency. He had found early on that the work was cleaner when the work was the thing, and the thing was not the work. Meridian Tower was the 3rd property he had purchased in the same year his daughter Emma started 1st grade 12 years ago, now bought with the proceeds from selling the Morrison Street building, which had appreciated well beyond his original projection. He had stood in the lobby after the closing paperwork was signed and looked at the space with the focused attention he gave to things that had become his responsibility, which was total and without sentiment. He had noted 3 things needing immediate attention called Carol before he reached the parking structure and gone to pick Emma up from school at 3:15, without mentioning the purchase to anyone because it had not occurred to him that it required mentioning. He visited each of his properties several times a year, unannounced, without a schedule communicated in advance to anyone beyond Carol. He did not do this to test his staff. He did it because he had learned that the relationship between a property and the person responsible for it required presence to remain accurate. That a building told you things when you walked through it, that it did not communicate through reports, and that the decisions he made about tenants and maintenance and renewal terms were better when made by someone who had recently been in the stairwells and service corridors and elevator lobbies and basement mechanical rooms. He had been planning to visit Meridian Tower before the Holt Dynamics contract renewal came up for decision. The timing was coincidental in the sense that 2 things had independently arrived at the same point, and he had combined them into one morning, because there was no reason to make 2 separate trips. Emma had been doing a summer internship on the 38th floor for 6 weeks. He had promised to bring food from the restaurant near his house, the one they had been going to together since she was old enough to have a preferred order, and he had picked up the bag on the way downtown and carried it into the building through the main entrance because it was his building, and the main entrance was the entrance he used. Emma Walsh had submitted her internship application in January under her mother's surname, and the decision had been entirely hers. She had thought about it longer than most people would have considered necessary, and had arrived at her conclusion through the kind of process she applied to most significant decisions, which was thorough and without shortcuts. The name Reeves in the commercial real estate context was searchable. A person with reasonable research skills and access to public property records could connect that name to a portfolio of city properties within 15 minutes. She did not want the marketing director at Holt Dynamics spending 15 minutes on that search before she had a chance to demonstrate that she could do the work. She wanted the internship to be evidence of what she was capable of, not evidence of who her father was. She had been accepted on the basis of a written response to a brief about digital content strategy, which the internship coordinator had described in the acceptance email as one of the stronger submissions received. Emma had read the email twice, sent a brief professional acceptance, and called Daniel that evening. She had told him about the internship. She had not told him the address. It had not come up until he mentioned dropping by with food. Graham Holt had founded Holt Dynamics 7 years earlier in a shared workspace on the west side of the city when the company had 4 employees and a product concept that had not yet found its market. The product found its market in year 3. The team grew to 41 people, and 18 months ago, the company closed a Series B of $40 million from a venture group whose name appeared regularly in the financial press. Holt was 39 years old and had been profiled in 4 business publications in the preceding 2 years in articles that variously described him as visionary, relentless, and exceptionally attuned to his target demographic. He read all 4 profiles and found them largely accurate. The 38th floor of Meridian Tower had been central to the company's public identity for 3 years. The views documented in every piece of recruitment material the company produced. The space, significantly redesigned after taking the lease, appeared in the background of every video the content team published, and the address was listed prominently on the website, the investor deck, and the business cards of every senior employee. Holt thought of the space as a component of the brand rather than a rented floor in a building that belonged to someone else, which was an understandable confusion given how thoroughly he had integrated it into the company's presentation, and which was the kind of confusion that a more careful person might have examined before allowing it to become load-bearing. The lease renewal had been on Carol Briggs's calendar for 6 weeks. She had sent the standard preliminary notice to the tenant contact at Holt Dynamics, received an acknowledgement from the operations manager, and prepared the renewal documentation for Daniel's review. The folder was waiting for his decision. Marcus Webb had been with Holt Dynamics for 4 years, long enough to have seen the company through 2 office moves, 1 major product pivot, and the cultural evolution that happened to startups when significant capital arrived, and the people who had been there from the beginning had to figure out which parts of themselves to keep. He had kept most of himself intact through a combination of selectivity about which battles to engage and genuine belief in the work. He had developed over those 4 years a reliable instinct for the moments when something was happening that he would need to form a view on. The moment in the lobby that morning had activated that instinct before he fully understood why. The elevator doors on the 38th floor opened at 11:43, and the man who stepped out was carrying a paper bag, wearing a jacket that had not been selected for the occasion, and moving through the space with the directional certainty of someone who had been in this building before and knew where things were. He was not looking around the way visitors looked around. He was not searching for the reception desk. He was not wearing a visitor badge or the lanyard that building management required of guests. Graham Holt intercepted him before he reached the kitchen corridor. What followed lasted less than 30 seconds, and Marcus observed all of it from across the lobby. He watched Holt register the paper bag and the jacket and the absence of any corporate identifier, and arrive at a conclusion. He heard what Holt said twice the first time, with the authority of someone issuing a correction, the second time with the finality of someone who had already moved on to whatever he was thinking about before the interruption. He watched the man with the paper bag respond briefly, and without heat, watched Holt disengage and walk away, and then watched the man do something Marcus kept returning to for the rest of the morning. He did not leave. He did not argue. He did not go to reception to explain himself. He walked through the lobby into the floor's interior, and the card he produced at the access panel beside the internal door was not the blue visitor card that guests received at the front desk downstairs. It was gray, no visible branding, and it worked without hesitation. Marcus knew the building's access system well enough to know what that card was. He did not say anything because he had not yet decided what there was to say. Daniel found Emma in the kitchen area at the back of the floor, at a table near the window with a laptop open and a notebook beside it, filled with the small, dense handwriting she had maintained since middle school. She looked up when he appeared with the paper bag, and her expression did the thing it had done since she was small when she was pleased to see him and was weighing whether to show it. She cleared the notebook aside. He set the bag on the table and sat across from her, and they opened the containers in the comfortable silence of people who had been eating together long enough that the logistics needed no discussion. She told him about the project she had been working on for the past week, a content audit that she had been approaching differently from the other interns, and she was not certain whether this was correct and wanted to think through it out loud. She explained the divergence, what had led her to it, and what she thought it would produce if she was right. He listened without interrupting, with the complete attention he had always given her when she was working something through. When she finished, he asked one question about the methodology. She answered it, and they both sat with the answer. "Useful to say out loud," she said. "Usually is," he said. Halfway through the meal, she looked at him with the evaluative attention she had inherited from him directly. "Why today specifically?" she said. "Building visit," he said. "And I told you I'd bring food. You do building visits midweek when you're deciding something." He did not confirm or deny this which she had learned to read accurately years ago. She waited to see whether he would add anything. He asked how the internship was going. She recognized the redirect. She accepted it and talked about the project for the remaining 15 minutes, and he listened, and when he stood to go, she walked him to the elevator. At the access panel, he produced the card, and the door opened. She saw the card. She did not say anything about it. He said he would call Thursday. She said okay, and the elevator arrived. She stood in the lobby after the doors closed. Then she went back to the table and the notebook and the content audit that was diverging from what the other interns were doing, for reasons she was increasingly confident were correct. The building's maintenance supervisor was a man named Roy Castillo, who had been managing Meridian Tower's operational systems for 9 years, and communicated in the precise economical language of someone who had learned that the people worth reporting to were the ones who wanted accurate information rather than comfortable information. He had been expecting Daniel's visit since Carol's message the previous afternoon, and he met him in the basement at 12:30 with a prepared summary. "2 items first," Roy said, walking Daniel toward the mechanical room. "Conduit on 4 is approaching end of service, and we have a drainage issue in the east stairwell that was addressed short-term but needs a longer solution before winter." Daniel asked 3 questions about the conduit and 2 about the drainage. Roy answered each one without elaboration. Daniel told him to get quotes on both and route them through Carol by end of the following week. Roy nodded, then said there was a 3rd item. He described it with the careful neutrality of someone reporting a fact rather than lodging a complaint. The noise complaints from the 37th floor, the unauthorized use of the 3rd floor atrium for promotional photography without permission, and the security incident from 3 months ago. A member of the Holt Dynamics leadership team had approached the building's head of security and requested that certain individuals be redirected away from the 38th floor lobby when they arrived for meetings, individuals who, in the language the representative had used, did not present in a way consistent with the company's brand environment. Security declined, Roy said. Correctly. He documented it and reported to Carol. Carol sent written notice to the tenant. Yes, no formal response. Daniel asked whether the atrium incident was documented. Roy said yes. Daniel said he would follow up with Carol and thanked Roy for the summary. They shook hands and Roy went back to his schedule. Daniel rode up to the lobby level and walked the perimeter of the ground floor, the way he always did at the end of a building, visit a slow circuit of the common areas, attending to the overall quality of the space. The lobby was clean. The elevator signage was current. The building directory had been updated within the past month. These were small things, and they were the things that told him whether a property was being maintained to his standard, and the standard was being met. He went to his car and called Carol at 1:15. "Don't proceed with the Holt Dynamics renewal," he said. "Standard non-renewal notice," Carol said. "Standard notice. 28 days as the contract requires. No additional language. I'll prepare it today and send it by end of week. Do you want the security incident record and the atrium notice pulled for the file?" "Already have them," Carol said. He thanked her and ended the call. He started the car and drove to his office on Harrison Street, which was 3 rooms on the 2nd floor of the 6th property in the portfolio, a mid-century building he had bought 4 years ago and renovated with the focused attention he gave to buildings that had been allowed to decline past the point where neglect was still invisible. He spent the afternoon reviewing quarterly reports and had a 20-minute call with his accountant about a depreciation schedule, and at 5:30 he drove home and made dinner. He did not think further about Graham Holt. The envelope was prepared by Carol on Thursday and entered the outgoing mail Friday morning. It arrived on the 38th floor of Meridian Tower the following Tuesday, addressed to Holt Dynamics Attention Office of the CEO from Reeves Capital Properties, LLC. Marcus Webb received the morning delivery and sorted it by recipient, as he always did. He recognized the return address because he had looked it up the previous week. He set the envelope on the stack for Holt's desk, with the careful neutrality he applied to tasks he had decided to complete without commentary. Holt opened it at 9:47, between the end of a product roadmap review and the beginning of a one-on-one with the head of engineering. He read the first 2 sentences, then read the document again from the beginning, at the pace of someone rereading something they had already understood, because the understanding required a second pass to confirm itself. The language was standard formal and unambiguous. Reeves Capital Properties, LLC was providing notice of its intent not to renew the current lease agreement for the 38th floor of Meridian Tower upon expiration of the existing term. Further inquiries should be directed to Carol Briggs, Director of Property Operations. Holt set the letter on his desk. He called the number listed for Carol Briggs, which he had not previously dialed, because there had not previously been a reason to. Carol answered in the professional and pleasant manner she answered all calls from tenant contacts. "I received a non-renewal notice this morning," Holt said. "I'd like to understand the basis for the decision." "Renewal decisions are at the owner's discretion," Carol said. "This decision was made by Mr. Reeves directly. I'd like to speak with Mr. Reeves." "I'll pass along the request." "When can I expect to hear back?" "I'll pass along the request," Carol said again, in the same tone, with no indication that any answer beyond that one was available. "Someone will be in touch if Mr. Reeves wishes to speak further." Holt thanked her and ended the call with the clipped precision of someone managing their response to news they had not prepared for. He sat for a moment, then typed the name Daniel Reeves into the search field on his computer. The results were thin, not because there was nothing to find, but because the person in question had not pursued the kind of visibility that produced a searchable footprint. Property registry filings. 2 brief mentions in local business publications from several years earlier, both related to acquisition activity, neither accompanied by a photograph. A short record from the city's commercial real estate database. Nothing that told him what Daniel Reeves looked like. Holt thought about the lobby. He thought about the paper bag and the jacket and the 11 words he had said. He thought about the gray card at the access panel, which Marcus had mentioned in a brief exchange that Holt had not fully attended to in the moment. He called his attorney. The attorney reviewed the lease agreement that afternoon and called back at 4:15. The non-renewal clause was standard and legally sound. The advance notice provided exceeded the contractual minimum. There were no grounds for challenge and no mechanism within the agreement that would allow the tenant to compel renewal negotiations. The property owner was entirely within his rights. Holt thanked the attorney and ended the call. He called Marcus into his office at 5:20 and closed the door. Marcus sat across the desk with the particular stillness he brought to conversations he had been anticipating, which was different from the stillness he brought to conversations that surprised him. Holt described the situation, the non-renewal notice, the attorney's assessment, the timeline problem, and asked whether Marcus had any information about the property owner that might be relevant to understanding what had prompted the decision. Marcus considered the question with the deliberateness of someone who had already thought through the answer and was deciding how much of the thought to share. "I looked up the property registry after the lobby incident last week," Marcus said. Holt did not respond immediately. "The registered owner of Meridian Tower is Daniel Reeves," Marcus said. "Through Reeves Capital Properties, LLC. 9 properties in the city based on the public record." Holt looked at the closed door for a moment, then back at Marcus. "The man in the lobby?" "Yes," Marcus said. The word occupied the room by itself for several seconds. "Why didn't you say something?" Holt said. Marcus looked at him with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who had prepared for this question. "Because you didn't ask," he said. He stood, returned the chair to its original position, and walked to the door. He opened it and stepped through and pulled it closed behind him with the quiet precision of someone who had said exactly what they intended to say and had no interest in saying more. Holt remained at his desk for a long time. The search for alternative space had been running for 6 days when the non-renewal arrived and had produced 3 candidates, none in the downtown corridor, and none available on the timeline the contract created. The closest option was in the riverfront district, adequate square footage, inferior views available in 8 weeks, with build-out requiring 3 to 4 months to reach the standard the content team needed. The gap between available and ready was approximately 11 weeks, in a situation where the usable timeline was 55 days. His operations team developed a bridging plan involving temporary arrangements with a co-working facility. The co-working option covered the basic operational need desks, connectivity meeting rooms, and was entirely unsuited to the use cases the 38th floor had been serving for 3 years. There would be no filming there, no client tours, no content referencing the office environment. The company's visual output went quiet for the duration of the bridge period, which produced a measurable drop in the engagement metrics Holt had been tracking weekly for 2 years. In the startup community across the city, where professional information traveled through networks rather than press releases, the news about Holt Dynamics' departure from Meridian Tower moved within 2 weeks. Not loudly, it was not that kind of story. But commercial real estate brokers knew, because brokers always knew when a significant tenant was displaced, and they talked to each other, and the people they talked to others. The version of the story that traveled was not embellished. It did not need to be. A tenant had told the building owner he was in the wrong building. The building owner had chosen not to renew. That was the whole story, and it was complete without additional detail, and it moved through the channels that stories like that always moved through, with the quiet and consistent momentum of a thing that was true and required no amplification. At 2 startup events in the months that followed, people who knew, Marcus Webb heard a version of the exchange in the lobby. By the 3rd telling, it had accumulated the specificity that factual events accumulated when they traveled through accurate channels: the paper bag, the 11 words, the gray card, the white envelope. No one embellished it because no one needed to. The embellishment was already built into the sequence of events as they had actually occurred. Holt was aware that the story was traveling because he was well connected enough in the same community to hear about his own situation from people who did not know he was hearing about himself. He managed his response to this information the way he managed most things that did not have an available action, by absorbing it without expression and returning to the work. The company was still worth building. He continued to build it. 3 weeks after the non-renewal letter arrived, Emma called Daniel on a Sunday evening from her apartment. She asked about his week. He described it in his usual efficient summary: a site visit to the Harborview property, a call with a potential acquisition contact that had not produced anything immediately actionable, a maintenance contract renewal for 2 of the smaller buildings. She listened and asked a question about the Harborview visit, which he answered. Then she said she had something she wanted to ask him. "The company I've been interning with is moving," she said. "They're leaving Meridian Tower, the whole office." He did not respond immediately. "I was wondering whether you knew anything about why." "What have you heard at the office?" he said. She described what was available at the intern level, the broad outline of the lease situation, the co-working bridge, the timeline pressure, without the specifics of what had preceded it. She had also heard from someone who sat near the operations area that Marcus Webb had said something brief to Holt that had apparently carried significant weight, though the details of that exchange had not traveled far from the closed office. "Was it connected to when you came to bring me lunch?" she said. He thought about how to answer this honestly. "There were several factors in the decision," he said. "What happened in the lobby was one of them." She was quiet for a moment. "He said that to you," she said. "And you didn't tell him who you were?" "I didn't have a reason to. He didn't know." "No." Another silence longer. "And the letter just said non-renewal, no explanation. That's standard practice for a non-renewal," he said. "Do you think he knows now?" "I think so," Daniel said. "Marcus told him." "Marcus figured it out. He noticed the access card." Emma sat with that. She had noticed the access card too, had registered it at the elevator panel when he was leaving, had not said anything about it. She understood now what she had been registering. "Bah," she said. "Yes. He said that in front of everyone in the lobby." "I know, and you just went to find me." "That's what I was there for," he said. She did not say anything for a while. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality he recognized from the times in her life when she had processed something and arrived somewhere that required her to adjust her understanding of how things worked. "Was the lunch the reason you came, or was the building visit the reason?" He thought about this honestly, which was the only way he thought about things she asked him directly. "Both," he said. "They happened to be the same day." "Okay," she said. They talked for another 20 minutes, about the internship's final weeks, about a presentation she was preparing for the last day of the program, about the divergent approach to the content audit that had turned out to be largely correct. He asked specific questions about the presentation structure. She answered them and revised 2 elements based on the questions. When they said goodnight, Emma set her phone on the table and looked at the wall of her apartment. She thought about the lobby as she now understood it. Her father with the paper bag, Holt's 11 words, the gray card working without hesitation at the access panel. She thought about the 3 weeks between the Tuesday morning and the white envelope arriving on Holt's desk, and about what had and had not been contained in those 3 weeks. She thought about Marcus Webb sitting at his desk with the browser tab open to the property registry, deciding what to do with what he knew and when to do it, and about the version of doing it that he had ultimately chosen, not a warning to Holt before the letter came, not silence after it arrived, but a brief and accurate statement of fact delivered to a person who could no longer use it to change anything. That choice had its own logic, and she understood the logic even if she was still deciding how she felt about it. She thought about the fact that her father had walked into that lobby in a jacket he had not selected for the occasion, carrying food from a restaurant they had been going to for 10 years, and had been told he was in the wrong building, and had said very little, and had gone to find her, and had sat across the kitchen table and listened to her talk about a content audit for 40 minutes without mentioning any of it. And she thought about the word he had used when she asked whether the lunch or the building visit was the reason he came. Both, he had said. They happened to be the same day. She picked up her phone and sent a text. "The presentation is going to be good. I'll send you the draft." He responded 4 minutes later. "Looking forward to it." She put the phone face down and went to finish the draft. Marcus Webb gave 2 weeks' notice to Holt Dynamics the following month. He had been thinking about it since before the letter arrived, he explained in the brief and professional resignation letter he left on Holt's desk, and the decision was not about any single event. Holt read the letter and called him in, and asked whether there was something specific that had prompted the timing. Marcus said no, which was accurate in the literal sense and which Holt did not press further, because Holt had spent the preceding weeks developing a new and somewhat more cautious relationship with the category of questions he had not previously thought to ask. Marcus left on a Friday, shook hands with the people who came to say goodbye, and took the elevator down for the last time. He had a conversation scheduled the following Wednesday with the property operations team at a real estate management company whose name he had come across while looking at the public registry the month before. He was prepared, if asked, to describe himself as someone with a strong instinct for reading operational situations accurately and a preference for working with people who asked the right questions before they needed to. Here is what the lobby at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning was actually about, and it was not about a paper bag. Graham Holt had built something genuinely worth building, and he had done it through speed, intelligence, and a clarity of judgment that had worked consistently enough across 7 years that he had stopped examining the assumptions behind it. He looked at Daniel Reeves, and he processed what he saw: the jacket, the bag, the absence of visible markers, and he arrived at a conclusion in the time it took to register the surface of things, and he acted on that conclusion in front of 20 people, and he moved on. The conclusion was wrong. And the mechanism that produced it, the speed, the confidence in what the surface communicated, the absence of any instinct to look further, was the same mechanism that had always produced his fastest and most certain judgments. He had not distinguished between the situations where that mechanism was reliable and the situations where it was not, because the situations where it was not reliable had not previously cost him anything he could feel. This one cost him the 38th floor. It cost him the view and the backdrop and the content that had been built around both for 3 years. It cost him 11 weeks of disruption at a point in the company's growth when stability mattered. And it cost him in ways that moved through professional communities without requiring anyone to make a formal announcement, the particular kind of credibility that was not recoverable through a press release. Real power does not need to be announced at a lobby entrance. It does not carry a badge that tells the room how to respond to it. It walks in through the front door with a paper bag and a gray card, and the quiet certainty of someone who has never needed the room to recognize them in order to continue doing what they came to do. The building was always Daniel Reeves's. The lobby was always Daniel Reeves's. The elevator and the floor above it, and the view that had appeared in 4 years of recruitment materials, all of it was always Daniel Reeves's, whether or not the man who leased one floor of it had thought to ask who owned the rest. Real leadership is not the ability to project authority before others have confirmed it. It is the patience to do the work without the projection, to let the documentation and the decisions and the decades of maintained properties speak in their own time, and to trust that the envelope, plain white standard postage, no additional language will say everything that needs to be said. How you treat the person in front of you before you know who they are is the truest test of the kind of person you actually are. If this story gave you something, leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who has ever been looked at and instantly categorized, and subscribe because the next story is already here and it belongs to someone else who never needed the room to recognize them and built something remarkable anyway.